Hello, I just wanted to real quickly go over what I'm going to call truthiness and falsiness in JavaScript. It was something that I sort of alluded to and talked about just briefly in the operators screencast, but I wanted to come back and just be a little more specific about exactly what was going on here. What we know is that JavaScript certainly has data, values that it tends to work with, values in the form of literals, values stored inside variables, values produced by expressions with operators in them, all sorts of different values floating around inside JavaScript. But what truthiness and falsiness has to do with this is that any value in JavaScript can kind of be seen on another level, not just as the value itself having whatever value it is, but also as having a Boolean value, basically being something that's true or being something that's false. Now, of course, the words truthiness and falsiness, according to my spell checker, are obviously made up, and maybe they are, but that's okay. I think they describe the situation pretty adequately, although the word falsiness for some reason disturbs me a little bit, and I'm afraid to think too much about it. But one way or another, basically what it comes down to in JavaScript is that any value in JavaScript other than false, zero, undefined, and empty string are considered to be true, whereas those four, false, zero, undefined, and empty string, are false. So we can actually use them in any situation, any value we can use in any situation that actually requires something that's Boolean, for example. So let me just kind of show you here what I mean. Let me make a variable. I'm going to call it x here, just to be concise, just to be brief. And for the value of x, let's do this. Let's write a conditional statement using the conditional operator, and let's say false, and then let's have it say that is false, I'm sorry, that is true, colon, and then that is false. Let's put that in as our Boolean expression, and then let's put in a document.writeLine where we just print out the value of x followed by a break. Right. So basically what the idea is going to be here is that we're going to assign to the variable x one of two values, either that is true or that is false, depending on whether JavaScript sees this value before the question mark as being true or false. Now, of course, here false is obviously false, so we should end up getting that is false assigned to the variable x, so that is what we will then print out. That is false. And if we look at it in our browser, sure enough, that's what we get. That is false. Let's try that with a few other values, though. What happens if I, for example, say 9? Right? So 9 doesn't have an obvious true or false value, but based on the truthiness or falsiness of different JavaScript values, 9 should be seen as being true. And sure enough, if we come back and look at it in our browser, we can see that JavaScript does evaluate 9 as a true value, a true statement, or a value that has truthiness. So it sees 9 as being truthy, so it takes the true part of the conditional operator, assigns it to x, and then that's what we actually print out. If we go through this with a few other values, if we try 0, we find that 0 is false. If we try it with an empty string, oops, got a little too much in my empty string there, right? It sees that as being false. If we try it with, let's see, undefined, that comes out as false, right? And I think that's the 4, false, 0, empty string, and undefined. Oh yeah, one more. What about null? Is null seen as being true or false? Actually, null is another one that's also seen as being false. I forgot to say that one up front. But besides those 5, everything else in JavaScript is basically considered to be true. So if I had a string with something in it, this is a string, right? That's considered to be true. So this can come in handy in all kinds of different places. You might remember back in our Lightspeed calculation script, we had basically a situation where we were prompting the user for something, enter something, and whatever they entered we figured could then be a real value, or it could be null if they hit cancel or hit escape, or it could be empty if they just hit OK without actually entering anything. And the way we handled this before was we went through many steps, not many maybe, but maybe 3 steps. Several of the steps were along the lines of set the value of x equal to something based on if x is equal to an empty string. We said set it to 0, otherwise keep the value of x. You might remember we had done something along those lines, and here I'm just going to print out the value of x so that we can see what we actually ended up with there. Okay? So it says enter something. If I put in a real value, I get that real value. If I just hit OK, right, I get 0, because here x was equal to the empty string. So we took the value of 0 and assigned that to x. We also did basically the exact same thing with null. We'd said if x is equal to null, then assign it the value of 0, otherwise assign it the current value of x. So again, if we run this and I hit the cancel button, okay, that sends back a null. We test to see if it is null right here. Right? When we find that it is, we assign 0 to it. And then finally what we did sort of as a last result was we created an output variable, and we assigned to the output variable based on the value of x. We said if x is equal to 0, then pick a better number, or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly what we said. Otherwise, we displayed the output. Let's just say your number is interesting. Right? And then down here we could just display the value of output instead of x. Sorry, got a little close to the bottom of the screen there. Alright, so now if I put in something, it tells me my number is interesting. If I don't put in something, just leave it blank, it asks me to pick a better number. If I hit cancel, it says pick a better number. So we had basically gone through more or less 3 different statements, both of these conditionals and this conditional, all with the intention of displaying some kind of sensible message to the user. But as it turns out, very little of that was actually necessary. We really could have gone with something quite a bit simpler along the lines of, let's say, var output equals simply the value of x, and then more or less those same 2 strings that we had before, except I'm going to turn them around. I'll explain why here in a second. Something like this. So more or less, something like this can replace those 3 previous statements. The reason that in this last statement I actually took and I turned the 2 strings around, kind of swapped their places, is because in what we had before we were dealing with a true condition. We were basically testing for truth, whereas here we're sort of looking for false. So we're saying if this value is true, meaning not one of those undesirable values, then we're going to print your number is interesting. Whereas if the value in x is false, or otherwise an undesirable value in our case, then we'll say pick a better number. So let's go back over to the browser and give that a try. Okay. If I actually type in something that says your number is interesting, maybe some numbers instead, though that's interesting. If I hit OK, give it an empty string, it says pick a better number, and if I hit cancel, it says pick a better number. So you can see that the truthiness or falsiness of values can something that can actually save you quite a bit of time, quite a bit of work, if you are able to understand and predict what the truthiness or falsiness of those values are going to be. So hopefully this will help clear up a little bit of what we did in that previous episode a little bit.